Hello, this is Paul Pawela from the American Police Hall of Fame. We're here with Marty Hayes for the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network.
Got it.
And we have a lot of different questions and topics of discussion on the subject of the armed citizen, especially with the topics of the day, the hot button topics of the day. So Marty, thank you so very much for doing this interview. We appreciate it very much, and we'd like to pick your brain a little bit about the subject matter. Would you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your organization?
Sure. The Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network is a nationwide organization comprised of armed citizens, firearms instructors, attorneys, gun shops, basically anybody that has a plank in the issue of the armed citizen. And the concept behind it is that we know that many times both police officers, police administrators, and the prosecutor's offices don't really understand the legitimacy of armed self-defense. And so what happens is that many times people become or get arrested, prosecuted, and sometimes convicted for a perfectly legitimate act of self-defense. And so that's what we are doing with the Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, is that we're basically setting up an organization where if one of our members is prosecuted after a legitimate act of self-defense, then they have the means to fight that unmeritorious prosecution.
That is long overdue as far as what we do in the United States. We've got a situation you're well aware of in Florida with the Zimmerman case.
Right.
Would you give our viewing audience maybe some legal or some tips that they may use as guidelines to go by on basically how to stay out of a situation like that if avoidable?
Well, you know, understand, George Zimmerman was basically asked by his local community and his local law enforcement agencies to serve as their eyes and ears. He was a block watch captain, and many agencies and jurisdictions throughout the country put block watches into effect to act as the eyes and ears for the police. George Zimmerman was doing everything correct that night. He observed suspicious activity. He called the police. He, and it was only when Trayvon Martin started to walk away, and Zimmerman felt that he should keep an eye on him because he was already on the phone with police, that he actually got out of his car and started following him. So I'm not going to say that he should have done a whole lot differently.
That's a very interesting viewpoint. I just had a conversation with a gentleman who I can't identify right now, but he worked on that particular case, and he pretty much articulates the same thing that you're saying. What would you say for the armed citizen, things to do as far as preparation? Because I find as a firearms instructor, not too many people they'll prepare for the event, but they won't prepare for the aftermath. Right. I'm wondering if you have any anecdotal tips that you might be able to give them.
Well, here's the thing: if you're prosecutor for an act of self-defense, the jury is going to what's the word I'm looking for? They're going to judge you on the basis of the reasonable man. Would a reasonable, prudent person have done what you did under those circumstances? Well, a reasonable, prudent gun owner should be well trained, first of all. They should be following all the laws of the situation. They shouldn't be drunk or otherwise acting like a jackwagon. You know, they need to be circumspect in their activities. That's what a reasonable and prudent gun owner, armed citizen, does. Secondly, then, they need to be able to document their training. They need to be able to document their education regarding their knowledge of use of deadly force. And then when they're questioned either by the police or the district attorney's office or an investigator, or eventually in front of a jury, they need to be able to articulate why they felt their life was in danger, and to have that jury be able to come back and say, you know, under those circumstances, I would have done the same thing. Because that jury is the ultimate reasonable man under those circumstances.
Now, you said something that was pretty important to me. I just read an article that you had talked about, and then one of the big issues was over documentation, and if that was an issue or non-issue. Without spoiling it for our viewing audience, I'd like you to elaborate on what you articulated in that article.
Well, I guess I don't quite recall the article you're referring to, but going back to actually using the police model, a police officer and their department and their training officer will document every piece of training that officer has had while working for that department. And so when an officer's actions are challenged in court, that officer or the attorney defending him can reach back into that training file and pull out the certifications or the piece of paper that says, that officer had training under those circumstances and he or she was just following their training. And us armed citizens, we don't have training officers, so we have to do it ourselves. We have to start our own training file and make sure that we keep our training documents and our training materials readily at hand in case this ever happens to us.
That's really outstanding advice, and I think more people ought to definitely start having their own logbooks and training and keeping an update on it. Are there any other things that you would like to emphasize to our audience as far as training or legalities of what what you would emphasize that they do or don't do?
Boy, it's I spent my whole life working in this discipline, and to boil it down to 60 seconds is tough. But I guess if I was going to shrink it down like that, then just simply, the police need to understand that armed self-defense is legitimate and it has a purpose in our society. The police can't do it alone. If we didn't have an armed society, there would be 10, 20, 30, 40 times the amount of crime out there, and the police would have their hands full. Take a look at Chicago, for example. The police aren't even responding to crimes in progress anymore unless it's life-threatening. So the armed society is necessary for the structure of the United States of America, and police need to understand that, and they need to embrace that concept. And then on the other hand, the armed citizen needs to do it right. They need to have the education and training, and when they get into a situation, they need to use the same restraint that most police officers are taught to.
One of the couple of things that we talk about all the time is the aftermath. Is there anything particular that you would advise a common citizen that has been involved in a lethal encounter? Do you have anything that you would tell them as recommendations of what to do, maybe not to do?
Yeah, two things. The first one is to be ready to act as a witness to the crime that was perpetrated against the armed citizen. The armed citizen wouldn't have used his gun in self-defense if a crime hadn't been committed against him. The police need to know what the details of that crime are so they can effectively investigate that. Secondly, the armed citizen needs to make sure that the police know that they were victimized, or that they were the victims of that crime, but not to get into a long, drawn-out discussion with the police regarding every little detail. Just like a law enforcement officer these days are not going to sit down with the investigators and write out a report and do these things until they've got their union attorney there with them, or their whatever type of situation they have. And they're usually going to wait 24 to 48 hours before they do that. Same thing should be done with armed citizens too. And the police need to understand that this is a protocol that is gaining ground, and the armed citizen is going to have to be able to say, listen, I want to cooperate fully with you, but please let me get counsel before we discuss this further. And then the counsel needs to understand that no, the client isn't going to talk right now. We want to get a good night's sleep. We want to be able to kind of go over what in our mind would happen. And so what we do tell the police is legitimate information.
Marty, I can't thank you enough. It's been a long time since we've seen each other, and Marty kind of took me under his wing 100 and some odd years ago. It seems like back in the day when I was a young man and just getting into this self-defense business, and you are one of my mentors, sir, and I thank you so very much.
All right, appreciate it.